Welcome to Moment the Other Way, a podcast about your journey and finances. I'm your host, James. In today's episode, we're discussing mutual funds, and Wanda's here to help provide some clarity. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
Are you spending your money wisely? So let's talk about mutual funds versus potentially investing in other modalities. I for sure want to cover definitions of mutual funds, how to buy it, and what are the costs, right? So mutual funds are, and you can look this up on Investopedia, they are an option where money is pooled together to buy a variety of stocks and bonds and other securities, right? And second, we can buy them online, retail. There's lots of ways, there's no end of ways to buy a mutual fund. You can buy them from a broker and that kind of thing. And then the third thing, right, the cost. Of course, nothing of value is free. If you're buying a mutual fund that has a mix of stocks, bonds, and other investments, you know that it costs money, right? So these have operating costs. Potentially they have account fees. Potentially there's sales loads, redemption fees, exemption fees. And I think we have a podcast about fees and that kind of thing. So take a look there for some of the fees that are out there. So let's talk mutual funds.
Yeah, I was going to kind of go into the first kind of question that kind of comes to mind is weighing the pros versus the cons here. It sounds to me you were mentioning the convenience of one. I mean, would you say the convenience of mutual funds is probably a benefit there?
Absolutely. Mutual funds give you the ability to broadly diversify a portfolio when you have limited assets. It allows for you to invest in a lot of companies without necessarily having to buy the stock of the company itself outright. And that does lead for economy of your money, right? And the other thing is that you and I don't really know what's going on in boardrooms at Microsoft or Apple. Apple reported poor numbers from their fourth quarter. We don't really know what is projected for Apple going forward. And so a mutual fund manager has the ability to go behind doors that you and I can't go and determine whether or not we should, in fact, be investing in Apple or not. And you're kidding yourself if you ever think that you could have as much information as a mutual fund manager regarding what's going on in the companies. And, should I be buying or should I be selling? What we do see is a lot of headlines. Oh, hey, so Tesla is terrible now. It'll never come back. But is that true? Or is it just repositioning itself and we would expect great results in the quarter to come? So again, this kind of diversification into a lot of different companies that you and I won't have ready access to information is definitely a pro for mutual funds.
As well as the managed portfolio side that you had just mentioned too, I feel like.
Yeah, right, exactly. Because again, news headlines, by now I think everyone's kind of sick of news headlines, but news headlines really are really reporting after the fact in a lot of situations. And so even as a consumer sees a headline, right, it's already been talked about in the boardrooms and the actions in the boardrooms are already being implemented in the company and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's important to know that you and I don't have all the information in terms of companies. The other thing in mutual funds, of course, is you can reinvest your dividends, right? It's a way to invest without putting a lot of thought and energy into it, allowing the fund manager who has much more information about the market to continue to invest your money while you go about the business of having your real life.
That kind of goes into the cons though. I mean, would having a reinvesting dividend be a tax event? Would there be more fees that you'd be taking on? I know you talked about fees earlier too.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing when you talk about dividends. Dividends are distributed by companies to the shareholders in general. When the companies don't feel like they could make good use of the money, they distribute it. You think about this a lot in terms of the blue chip companies will have higher dividends in general. That becomes a taxable event for you. We'll talk more about that on a tax podcast, as do capital gains. Or rather, in a mutual fund, you generally will reinvest those dividends in capital gains. The fund manager can then manage the money that you're giving, you're reinvesting your dividends. You're basically giving them back to him to look at the next investment possibilities there. So there's some tax things there. Again, it is an efficient way to invest. But it goes to that question of selecting the mutual fund, right? There are 8,000 mutual funds out there. And so which to pick? And so that's a tough question. Lots of investment companies think they have the best answer. And you and I will know the ones that are best marketed. Of course, everyone knows about Fidelity and Vanguard. These are big names in the industry, big players. And so the information that they put out there is, well, it's marketed advertising, and then everybody wants that one. But is that best for you? Is that best for your investment objective? Is that really what you need in your life? So just to keep in mind that, right? That just because you see it and it's well marketed doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing out there.
Could you
I think,
compare it
right?
to like say a wine, for instance? Just because it has a high price tag doesn't mean it's a good wine.
Well, that's a different thing, right? Just because it has a big name doesn't mean that it's a good wine, right? So you frequently will hear Chateau Montelena and Silver Oak. Those were wines that took the French wine market by storm a few years ago. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best wines. It just means that they did win some contests some years past. That's the same thing with mutual funds, right? A mutual fund may, in fact, have won some contest, and I say contest, right? But posted great performance numbers. So what's behind those performance numbers? And that's important to understand what's behind them. Because does this fund need to be in your portfolio? Funds will go up and down, right? Well, we've talked about that. When you're buying, right, you want the market to be down, right? We've talked about
Hmm.
that. Is a mutual fund down because of something that's going on behind the scenes that they see as a possibility? And so, again, selecting a mutual fund, not as easy as it sounds. And for most of us, the most information you have is performance, right? You look at the performance and it makes the top 10 mutual funds. This is the one I have to have, but is it really the best one to have? And what have they done lately? And is there other ways of looking at mutual funds? And then I think, potentially sitting down with a professional to analyze mutual funds. Interestingly enough, if you're in the top half of all mutual funds over a period of time, in general, you'll be in the top 5, 10% of returns in the market. This is not to say that there's a lot of media about fund managers not doing well over time. And naturally, right, if you're looking at a mutual fund and if you're saying, I want to focus here on the top half of the market and mutual fund managers, naturally, there's the bottom half. And
Hmm.
so, and how do you navigate that? That's not an easy thing to navigate. Again, 8,000 mutual funds. How do you pick it? I have a hard time just going to the store and picking ice cream.
Yeah, paradox
Woo!
of choice when you have so many options. I mean, like, what do you do?
Right. I'm fairly confident that there's probably less than 20 different brands of ice cream out there. And
And then
again,
in
with
each kind of brand of ice cream, you have to sit in like, which version of that ice cream do I want?
right,
Do I
right,
want
exactly. Right.
mint chocolate
Fidelity,
chip? Do
no.
I want
Hmm.
Oreo? Yeah, you have to determine
Yeah.
what you want.
Fidelity known for its growth mutual funds, right? But within Fidelity, probably I would imagine at least easily over 100 mutual funds. So which one
Geez.
is working for you? So, and again, having
Sitting down
some
with a financial advisor would probably be helpful, would you say?
some professional guidance, even if you don't take the guidance, right? Maybe to help understanding the selection or what you should consider when you're looking at mutual funds. And performance is not the only number that you should look at. And I so often people think, oh, but they had a great year last year. But it might be last year, right, that they bought NVIDIA stock. This is not a recommendation. As I mentioned, Apple, that kind of thing. These are not recommendations to buy these stocks, by the way. I think we need to make sure that that's disclosed. But we can look at the market and say NVIDIA had a great year. And if a fund manager bought a lot of NVIDIA, right? Woo!
Hmm.
So performance number is not the only thing, but what gave it the performance is
Hmm.
important to know. Why did they have the performance when you're looking at that fund? So,
I guess a little side question that kind of comes to my mind, and Peggy is the other advisor with us at Finances for Real
mhm.
Life.
Yeah,
Peggy and
yeah.
I had discussed on a previous podcast regarding employee benefits and
Right.
401ks, and if
Right.
would you say that if you were investing in a 401k and it was in mutual funds, should you talk to the 401k manager to see what they recommend?
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, and that's an interesting market. I think we'll have a podcast about 401ks. Understand that a 401k refers to the tax code, and those companies who have 401ks have to go out and do reporting on them. And so there is a whole industry in and around retirement plans. I think right now the biggest retirement plan 401k company is actually Fidelity right now, about to be overtaken, I think. So you see a lot of other players in that market. Those companies in general have informational people, and those informational people are required to give education, and the education may be limited to the company that's associated with the investment that is
So
within
the
that
person that
401k.
would be telling you what to invest in for your 401k would just
Mhm.
be someone from Fidelity selling Fidelity.
Right. So two things, right? They're limited. The 401k advisors or the 401k people that you call are limited in either the investment company that they're working with, right? Or the amount of information that they can give you, right? It can be only education and not a recommendation, right? So
Okay,
it's a different thing than a fiduciary who's sitting down with you and making a recommendation. Somebody like me that is a fiduciary to you in your best interest, a little bit of a different marker for them. So just that they are limited. So the question is what the limitations are and to understand the limitations on that.
great. And
Um,
then I guess kind of going into the next question I have is the different types. I know we had said, there are different companies that sell mutual funds, different mutual
right.
fund companies, but there's also different types of mutual funds, and we had referred to fees. There's three major types. We have the front end loads, the back end loads, and the level load funds. Do you want to
Right.
kind of go into each of those and what to kind of expect and understand from each of them?
Yeah, and there's actually the no load, right? That's a type of mutual fund, but interestingly, each of the mutual funds will have like various share classes. And then the share classes will be listed in terms of whether or not they are front load. So an A
Class
share
A
in
would
general
be
will be yeah. And then you'll have like the B share in general will be considered a side load. And in general, right? C is it's considered a back load, right? Usually there's a redemption fee on that kind. But then there's I
well,
share and there's P share and there's R share, and it'll still all be the one mutual fund, but it'll have all the different share classes within it. So these are
interesting.
like, yeah, it's a lot of types out there. I am surprised how many types there are. And then there can be so many types such that they might have a retirement share class. They might have a 401k share class. They might have, and all of them have different loads associated with them and different costs associated with them. An I investment share class generally associated with an investment advisor. So lots of different types there. And so again, picking the mutual fund company, picking a mutual fund, and then when you pick the mutual fund, picking the type of investing you're doing within that mutual fund in terms of the load. Does that part make sense?
Yes, it does. It does.
I think it's getting complicated even like whenever I
I
have someone
know, just
says,
trying to go
I
through it because it sounds to me, I mean, you can clarify here, but it sounds to me it's just important to sit down with someone to help determine what's the best option for someone.
right, exactly. And again, costs are important, right? And then kind of there's a management fee underlying on the backside of mutual funds. And so you do want to be aware of that and impact. Interestingly enough, over time, an investor pays less in general over time in an A share with a front end load because of lower management fees, annualized management fees over time. So
And what about
just as
breakpoints? Would
breakpoints are generally given to people who have large amounts of money. And so again, breakpoints are um, based on if you invest over, generally it's over 25,000 or 50,000. A lot of mutual fund companies seem to be going away from those a little bit. Some of the markers are up there as high as 250. So you'll get a break on the front end load, but not to worry, right? It's a competitive market and they're going to work to keep their costs as low as possible. We talk a lot about cost compression in the mutual fund industry. They are working very hard to ensure that they put out the lowest cost because they know it's important to consumers.
hmm
And it
hmm
should be it should be important, I should say, for all of us, right?
And
Yeah.
then the final kind of question that's coming to my mind, and this is something that I actually grew up with personally. My parents talked all the time about index funds, and index funds,
Right, right,
as
right.
opposed to mutual funds. And I wanted to get your take as a financial advisor, as a fiduciary.
Yeah.
What's the difference here?
Index funds have gotten a lot of popularity because index funds, they say, are cheap, right? You don't have to pay a lot of management fees because the computer rules the day. The computer says there are 500 stocks. We create a mutual fund with the 500 stocks in there. And then you're investing in all 500, no matter what's going on over time, right? That sounds like, yeah, hey, lower expenses. But you have to consider, did you really want ownership in 500 stocks? Did you want them in all of those stocks? And then within that 500, if you think about those companies, and the S&P 500, generally they make decisions about what stocks move in and out of that on a regular basis. We're going through the last quarter, the earnings reports. In the moment, right, the Magnificent Seven are getting a lot of attention, right? Those are the 7 stocks that appear to be giving us most of the performance in the S&P 500 at the moment, right? And those stocks, of course, Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Meta, Microsoft, Nvidia, and Tesla. Those are your 7.
Google
So
is
if
Alphabet.
yeah, Google Alphabet, yeah. So this is interesting, right? Because you want to own all 7, right? Actually, and Tesla is in that group, but Tesla was actually negative. And so do you want to own Tesla going forward? That kind of thing. Those 7 gave the stock market positive returns for that last quarter of last year. And in fact, if we took out those 7, right, the other 493 of the stocks in the S&P 500 actually only gave 1 to 2% to the total performance numbers of the fourth quarter. The question then becomes, do you want all 500 stocks in your portfolio? It's cheap to own all 500, right? But is Tesla past its prime, right? Is this a fund that you want? Nvidia had great numbers. Is this overpriced at the moment? And so my concern with those index funds is that the question is, they are cheap, but is that the only thing you should be thinking about? You should be thinking about what its real return is to you as an investor. And then that's my point about advised mutual funds have the potential to weed out what we should be holding and what we should not be holding. But again, they are cheap. So today we wanted to cover the definition of a mutual funds, right? Investment pool of various stocks, bonds, and other investments, how to buy them either through a broker or online in general. And then some of the costs associated with mutual fund. And then we tagged out some topics for future podcasts to include index funds.
Yeah.
Index funds and indexes.
Well, I just want to say thank you for listening to today's podcast. If you have any questions, you can find us at financesforreallife.com. Feel free to schedule an appointment with Wanda. Just see what's available on her schedule that matches your time. And yeah, reach out to us. We hope to hear from you. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you in the next episode. Securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, SIPC. Investment advice offered through Finances for Real Life, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from LPL Financial. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. Investing in mutual funds involves risk, including possible loss of principal. Fund value will fluctuate with market conditions and may not achieve its investment objective. There is no guarantee that a diversified portfolio will enhance overall returns or outperform a non-diversified portfolio. Diversification does not protect against market risk. Dividend payments are not guaranteed and may be reduced or eliminated at any time by the company.